call on order of the day number 5.
Building Pools Amendment Bill. Interrupted debate on second reading.
Next speaker is from the Labour Party. I call Jacinda Ardern.
E te marangai o te whare, tēnā koe,
Tēnā
Mr
koe.
Speaker, tēnā koutou. Mr Speaker, it's my privilege to be the first speaker on this, the second reading of the Fencing of Swimming Pools Act. And I think it's fair to say that as we come to back to Te Whare to debate this bill, that we have considerably more information on the table than we did at first reading. And one aspect of the debate that I want to clarify really relates to an exchange that came up between the Minister in charge of this bill, Nick Smith, and I during question time on one occasion, where we had cause to question the motivation of the Minister bringing this set of reforms to the House. And in questioning some of the analysis, some of the assumptions of the Minister, he laid claim in this House that it was indeed Labor who had set out the process that he was undertaking, and therefore that any questions we were raising were somehow an own goal. Mr Speaker, I want to clarify that Shane Jones did initiate a review of the fencing of swimming pools when he held that ministerial portfolio. And I read the forward of Minister Jones' consultation document at that time, and he was very clear. He was clear that the Fencing of Swimming Pools Act had saved lives, but that there were more lives to be saved. We obviously weren't able to finish that process. There was an election. That work was shelved for years. Nick Smith then came into the role, dumped the process that Shane Jones had undertaken, re-released a discussion document that specifically stated that in fact his purpose was to reduce compliance costs. The whole purpose, direction that he was setting out and undertaking again a process of seeking submissions had a very different flavour to that of Shane Jones. So I wanted to correct the record because it is disingenuous to say that what we are debating in this House was instigated, particularly in terms of what it's produced, by the Labour Party, when our primary goal was to reduce down further, if possible, the loss of life. And the primary goal of the government has been something very different. Now, Mr Speaker, that's not to say that these two things are mutually exclusive, but we would not prioritise one over the other when saving lives clearly should be our main primary focus. Mr Speaker, it's fair to say that also during this debate, it's been clear that since first reading, some of the claims that have been made by the government have been patently false on the way that the bill was first drafted. As I've said, the Fencing of Swimming Pools Act there is no question, has contributed to a large decrease in the number of accidental drownings in New Zealand, from 100 in the 10 years before FOSPA to 30 in the 10 years that followed through to 2012. Undoubtedly, it has made an impact. But what the government claimed was that the bill that they presented to us, which departed from some of the standards originally, as first drafted, departed from some of the standards that were established. They claimed that they would reduce further the loss of life. And we, in good faith, voted with that bill based on the regulatory impact statement. We then heard evidence from WaterSafe, Auckland Regional Public Health Services, the Paediatric Society of New Zealand, Starship, graphic submissions around how they questioned whether or not this bill would in fact achieve that. In fact, they raised the point that they believed more lives would be lost as a result of these amendments. In particular, I want to reflect on the fact that the New Zealand Society of Paediatricians stated that the most effective way to reduce drownings further would be to ensure compliance with the existing standards that were in place. Hard-fought standards that were the subject of a huge amount of consultation. So their view was, if you want to reduce drownings, actually check that people are compliant, because there has not been a drowning with a pool that has been compliant with the Fencing of Swimming Pools Act since it's been in place. That's a really interesting point, that most of the drownings have in fact been when there has been a breakdown in following and complying with that regulation, a broken latch, something that's a label due to climb over fencing, other aspects that were outside the control of the Act itself, but actually when it's followed, it works. So the idea that this bill originally came to the House and proposed that we create a longer lead time between inspections by council seems completely counterintuitive. The argument was that councils were not consistent and uniform in their inspection regimes. So the government proposed that even though a majority of councils inspected every 3 years, they proposed that we uniformly set the level at 5. Now that struck us as being wrong. Auckland Council, for instance, maintained that they should stick with the 3-yearly inspections, as 65% of pools are found to be uncompliant when inspected within this time frame. Imagine what compliance would be like if we pushed it out to 5. We pushed hard at Select Committee for the government to see sense, to create a uniform inspection regime at 3 years, given that's what most councils were advocating themselves. And I'm very, very pleased to say that the government agreed with that analysis eventually, and that that's an amendment that's been made as part of that robust Select Committee process. So we congratulate the government on that. That was a good step. In fact, that is one of the reasons why we will be voting at this stage in favour, to make sure, hold fire, Chris Bishop. We want to make sure that we support the majority amendments that were made at Select Committee, and acknowledge the progress that was made. But our support at third reading is contingent on successfully making further amendments to the bill at committee stage, particularly around the dilution around four-sided fencing. So currently, all of the evidence says the best way to stop drowning is to have a complete four-sided fence. Now, the government has made an amendment which will allow the entry to a home, for instance, the door to a home, between the doors to a home and a pool, to act as a fourth side instead of a fence. And that you can use, for instance, a monitored alarm that will sound if someone exits through that door into the pool area. Alarms are unproven when it comes to ensuring safety. We only need to look at what's happened in jurisdictions where they've done some analysis around fire safety, that if an alarm becomes annoying to people, they disable it. Easily done. Or, for instance, if you are distracted, which is one of the primary causes of some of our drownings when they are accidental drownings, this momentary distraction of a parent away from supervising a pool area, if they're distracted, they're less likely to even hear an alarm. So if you've already got that primary cause in place, the likelihood they're going to hear an alarm is also diluted, and then you lose all your protection. We should not allow our legislation to be based on where human frailty can enter, because this is where our safety and our regulations fall down. So significant evidence to suggest that alarms are unproven internationally. Lots of reasons they can fail. We don't support them over and above the other mechanisms that have been proven. And so we will be seeking an amendment to remove the use of alarms as a substitute for the current standard, which works. I want to acknowledge the other gains that the committee made. They broadened the purpose of the Act beyond drowning to injury, which was an important point. They made sure that the acceptable solution, the standards, the Building Act, of course, gave the impression that rather than having defined standards, that we're moving to this acceptable solution. It embeds actually that the acceptable solution is the one that's actually specified in the standards in the Fencing of Swimming Pools Act. Why did officials not make that clear to submitters? There was so much confusion around that point, but we've hoped that we've clarified that at Select Committee. And also the bill provides greater information now to councils re spa pools, because again, we're now reliant for spa pools on having lockable lids. Still some question marks for us over whether that's going to be an acceptable solution. We do know there have been drownings with spa pools. But for us, the main point was there are elements of this bill that dilutes what we have. and we are keen to remove those parts of the bill. We're supporting it for now, Mr. Speaker, but our third reading support will be contingent on that SOP being successful, and I really would like to bring the members across the House their attention to our hope that that SOP will have their support.
Scott Simpson.